So in this video, we're going to be looking at the EPQ project proposal, and it's aimed at supervisors, and we're going to be talking about why we complete the project proposal, how we complete it, what happens next, and any common issues to watch out for. As always, if you've got any questions, please do just ask. But let's now have a look at what the project proposal process involves. So in terms of why we complete a project proposal, essentially the EPQ and the HPQ are both trying to get students ready to complete research projects as they progress through their education, and put them in a good place to understand what's required of them of a research project at university and beyond. Nearly all research projects will have some sort of form of project proposal where you make a plan for the research that you're going to conduct, and then you get approval from it for that research. And after you've had approval, then you can actually conduct the research project. And it's just the same with the EPQ. We've got some particular things that we need to do when we are approving the project as a centre for this examined project. So first of all, we have to check that the student's project will work and that it's going to enable them to access the highest marks available. So if there's any sort of real issues at this point that mean that they're never going to be able to access the highest marks, then we can't approve that project. We then also need to check, we've got a really large sort of safeguarding burden to check that they're going to be safe while conducting their research. So that's in terms of the type of research sources that they're going to be exposed to, whether any of those are harmful, and also making sure that any way that they're thinking about conducting research, maybe let's say in terms of interviews or contacting people, that they're not going to be putting themselves in harm's way with the people that they're going to be contacting regarding their research. And then finally, we need to make sure that any participants that they're going to try and recruit to take part in their research, either through interviews or questionnaires, that those participants are taking part in ethical research, so they have been fully informed about what the research involves, they have consented to take part in the research, and that their identity is going to be protected. So those are the three key things we're looking for when we're assessing a project proposal. Now, if we go to the EPQ specifications, obviously this is for the AQA EPQ. In the specification, we can find this part of the document, and this is like our 5-point checklist to check whether the proposal is acceptable and whether it can move forward and turn into a research project. So we're going to keep referring to this part of the specification during the videos. Sometimes it can be much quicker to actually have this document in front of you while you're completing the Part B project proposals. So these are our 5 things, so let's go through those now. So first of all, we need to check that the working title of the project allows the student to investigate and access the higher level concepts and skills. So we're thinking about planning, researching, analysing, evaluating and explaining, rather than just describing and narrating. We don't want them to just describe the research they have found, or have a sort of Googleable question that is quite simple in its nature. They're not going to be able to access the highest marks if that's the case. Number 2, are the working title and proposed action clear and focused on an issue, which can be managed within the timescale, available resources and word total. Sometimes students come with very interesting questions and research proposals that will allow them to access all of the high level concepts, but they're just not feasible within the 90 hours, the 5,000 words that they have available, or they're not feasible because they do not have access to the resources that they need to complete that research. So this one tends to be one that we have to sort of flag up quite a lot, so do be aware of that one. Number 3, does the working title and proposed action indicate that the student will be capable of investigating and researching the topic or carrying out the activity independently, safely and ethically? So this is where we need to think about any safeguarding concerns. This would include completing risk assessments for practical work such as a scientific investigation or building an artefact. And then from an ethical point of view, that if they have said that they are going to use interviews or questionnaires, they've thought very carefully about how they are going to make sure that they're conducting their research in an ethical manner. Number 4, is there a danger that the student will be unable to approach the project impartially and in a balanced way? Sometimes often students pick research projects that are highly applicable to them. That's just sort of part of human nature, that's not a problem at all. But sometimes that it's on a topic that they have got such a strong personal view on that they're going to find it incredibly difficult to be impartial. And so we just need to flag up that that's something that they need to take account of. It's not necessarily a reason to reject the proposal, but we do need to flag it up as a concern, as something to be aware of. And then finally, is the student likely to face difficulties understanding the concepts associated with the project topic? So if it's a very advanced project topic, especially if they're trying to extend and develop beyond an A-level course, sometimes that can be an issue. On top of those 5 things, we've also got, as we can see from the specification, the requirement as supervisors that we are responsible for checking there is no dual accreditation with the students' A-level courses. Now, we've got a lot of that sort of work, the dual accreditation checks going on before they get to the project proposal stage. But if for any reason you have concerns, it must be flagged up in the project proposal parts that we're completing. So just as a quick overview before we move on to the next stage, the project proposal has got 3 parts to it, part A, part B and part C, each part being filled out by a different person. So part A is filled out by the candidate, where they give an outline of the research plan that they have. Part B is filled out by the supervisor, where they're talking about these 5 things in the dual accreditation that we just mentioned. And then part C is filled out by the coordinator, and the coordinator then says whether the project is approved, in which case the research project can start, whether it's approved subject to recommendations being implemented, in which case it can start, but you need to keep quite a close eye on those recommendations, or whether the project proposal needs to be resubmitted, in which case we need to go back and have another conversation with that student and get the proposal sorted out. Just a quick reminder because this is such an important part of the EPQ process, really important that we add completion dates at the bottom of the pages when we're finishing it off. And then if you can click it as saved, as signed off, then that means that the red tick will appear when we're looking at the overview of the student status, especially when we've got large student cohorts. That makes it much easier to keep track of how everyone is doing and what stage they're at. So if I could just ask everyone to make sure they're putting the dates in and saving the pages so that it's easier to keep track of everyone, that would be great, thank you. So this is a screenshot from Project Q, which is where we're filling in the product log document, and the project proposal is part of the project log. So you can see they've completed their record of initial ideas already, then they complete part A, the candidate proposal, and then we are completing part B, the supervisor proposal, before we go on to part C, the coordinator approval. We've got these questions that we need to respond to, so indicate the relation to and development extension outside of the main courses of study or interest, comment on the suitability of the proposed initial sources and research base, confirm that the project is feasible in the proposed timescale, and or indicate any potential difficulties that may prevent the candidate from meeting the assessment objectives. So hopefully you can see already how these boxes link back to our sort of a 5-part checklist plus the dual accreditation. So let's look at what we put in each box now. So we've got the first 2 boxes here and our 5-point checklist so that we can see everything as we're working through. So indicate the relation to and development / extension outside of the main courses of study or interest. This is where we're going to state clearly that we have no dual accreditation concerns, as long as we have no dual accreditation concerns. If we do have them and we don't have the evidence to say that there isn't an issue, that needs flagging up in this box, and that we must do that. That's a very, very important requirement of us as supervisors and of the centre. So if we have the emails from the heads of department saying that there's no dual accreditation, we can put a very clear statement here. There is no dual accreditation concerns with this project. There are other bits as well. In here, quite often it's nice to just put a general bit about how interested or passionate the student is about their research project, where the ideas come from, just so we're sort of setting the scene for everyone to see why they're interested in this research project, and it's their research project. So that's where we're ticking off our dual accreditation requirement. Then in this next box down here, comment on the suitability of the proposed initial sources and research base. So a couple of things we're looking for. Students have been told very, very clearly they have to give us specific examples of sources they have found in their initial research phase. We should be getting links, references, etc. to the sources they have already found. We should not be getting any project proposals where they simply say they are planning to use books, journals and websites. That's not good enough, that's not specific enough. There's no indication that they have checked there are sources available, which links back down here to number 2. Are we clear that there are available sources to complete the project with? So here we're going to make a comment about their initial sources. So first of all, the check is, have they given specific examples with references or links? Next, we want to look at the type of quality of sources. If we've been given 5 YouTube videos and that's it, we're going to need to comment on that. If we have got a mixture of books, published journals, peer-reviewed work, then we can say that everything is looking really great and we don't have any concerns about the initial sources. Also here, in terms of the research base, this is where we're going to talk about any safeguarding concerns. So do we have any concerns about the type of research that the student will be conducting and any harmful material they might be exposed to? Especially if they're doing any online research, this is really important. If you've got any questions, always please do come and ask. And this is where, if they've said they're going to do interviews or questionnaires, we want to be raising any ethical concerns. They can't just say that they're going to interview people to get their points of view. If they want to do interviews, they've had this lesson already in the Taught Skills programme. What measures are they putting in place to make sure their research is ethical? How are participants being recruited? How are they being informed about the purpose of the research? How is their identity going to be protected on the results? And so on. So this is where any safeguarding or ethical concerns in terms of the research sources would go as well. So next, if we scroll further down the page, sorry we couldn't fit it all onto the screen, we then have this box here. Confirm that the project is feasible in the proposed timescale. Indicate any potential difficulties that may prevent the candidate from meeting the assessment objectives. This is quite an important box. We've got all of these other points here that we need to address. And our role here is to flag up any potential problems so that they can be sorted, taken into account, and that they're not going to prevent the student from doing really well in the project. So a couple of things to think about. Sometimes, and this is one of our most frequent things, is that they've just really overestimated how much they can get done in the 90 hours. So have a think about the timescales. Have they proposed a research project that is too long and is not going to fit in? If there is a concern there, flag it up. If there isn't a concern, say that it seems like a manageable project. It might be that their research project is too short as well. It might go the other way, in which case flag that up. Next thing to think about is the word limit. Are they going to be able to fully answer their research question within the 5,000 words available? This leads us on to a sort of a much broader idea, and they've had lots of taught skills sessions and meetings and discussions about this, about how they phrase and frame their question. If they have got a very broad question and they haven't been refining it down, it's going to be very unlikely they can fully answer that question in 5,000 words, and that will need flagging here. If we have any concerns about whether they can be impartial when they're conducting their research, pop it in here. Have a think about their current proposed title. Obviously, it can change up until the mid-project review, but what we can find, some students will have done a brilliant job of providing a research question or a research title, and some that are maybe slightly behind in the process or haven't done as much initial research will have proposed quite a broad research area, and they'll be saying, well, I'll be looking into this area. Now, the issue with that is that if they haven't refined it into a question, there's even more research they need to do within the time available to turn it into a question and then to fully answer it. So if you have any concerns about whether the question isn't a question, whether it's just a research topic, do say that here quite clearly so they can act on that and take that on board. And then finally, this idea about whether the question or title is going to encourage the student to analyse their sources or whether it sounds as though they're going to describe their sources. This is by far one of the biggest sort of issues that comes up and that we see at the most frequently in the project proposal stage. If you think it sounds like they're going to describe something, then say you need to make sure that you analyse your sources and not just describe them. So that can end up being quite a long box, but it's really important that we've addressed all of these 5 concerns here, and we've highlighted anything that we think is going to be an issue. We then change these drop-down boxes to whether they are currently saying it's going to be a report, a 5,000 word report, or an artefact, an accompanying report. There shouldn't at this point be any group exercises if I haven't spoken to you already about that. So that can stay as a no. So we've talked about changing these 2 boxes. We don't have any group projects unless I've spoken to you separately about that. So this box can be left blank as well. And then add the date that you're completing the page on, click it to yes, and then click save. And then the Part B project proposal will come up with a red tick. And then we can all clearly see that it is completed. If you could drop me an email when that is done, especially when we've got large cohort sizes, that would be great. And then I know that we're ready for the coordinator approval stage. So in terms of what happens next after you've completed Part B, the supervisor proposal, the coordinator then completes Part C. So they read through Part A from the candidate, they read through Part B from the supervisor, and they then make a comment and give some feedback here. So it might be that they are echoing what the supervisor has said. It might be there are 1 or 2 points that they additionally want to flag up and they might get mentioned in here. It might just be that it's a great project proposal and they're really excited to see the finished project. So that goes in there. And it's going to be important that you as a supervisor read through that feedback as well, so that you can discuss it with the candidate in the planning review meeting. 3 things can then happen. If it has been approved and this is changed to yes, then you have a planning review meeting with the candidate and they start their research project. It might be that that's a no, but this one here, approved subject to implementation of the centre coordinator's recommendations, that might be a yes. In which case you have the planning review meeting, but it needs to be quite detailed and you need to make sure and be convinced that the student is acting on the feedback that was here and the feedback that you gave in the supervisor proposal Part B. It might be that both of those are no and this one is ticked yes, resubmission required, in which case we'll need to organise a meeting, and it may well be that the coordinator, the supervisor and the candidate have that meeting, so that we can make a sort of a list of things to do next and discuss where to go from there with the research. So if we take this opportunity to just briefly mention what's going to happen in the planning review meeting, really important meeting in terms of getting the research project off to a really productive and efficient start. So this is the page from the planning review tab on Project Q. So the planning review is a meeting between the supervisor and the student. And ideally, if possible, the meeting would take place as soon as possible after the proposal has been approved in Part C. It's normally about a half an hour meeting, and the student should bring this first box completed to the meeting. So this box should be complete prior to the meeting. And in this box, the student needs to read the feedback from part B and part C, and then say how they are going to act on or implement any recommendations. That should all be in this box here. So this is where they're showing you that they're listening to our feedback and they're acting on it. And that's going to be quite important, especially depending if they weren't given approval. So read, if possible, what they've written there prior to the meeting. If they haven't filled that box in and they turn up to the meeting, I think you can tell them to go away and fill that box in and then come to the meeting when they're ready. They will have very clear instructions so that they know they need to fill in this box prior to the planning review meeting. They will then fill in this box summarising the comments and advice that you gave them based on what they were discussing in the meeting, and then any modifications they can then fill in afterwards down there. In terms of what we're trying to achieve within that meeting, we're checking that they've read the feedback and they're acting on it. They should also be bringing their project plan to discuss and to look over to the meeting. They've had a taught skills session on making their project plan. The idea that they have to sort of, in one format or another, map out the various different jobs that need doing within their research project. They know that they need to monitor their progress against their project plan as part of their AO1 manage evidence. So they're very aware about the need here for a project plan, but this is where you're asking to see their project plan and checking that it looks feasible, it looks realistic, that they've left enough time for certain things. And then that is the planning review meeting, essentially. So finally, a couple of common issues that regularly appear with our project proposals, so they're worth bearing in mind. First of all, always be on the lookout for dual accreditation. Even if you're not sure, don't assume it will be fine. There's no way that we can all have an intricate working knowledge of all of the various different A-level specifications that our students are able to take. So if in doubt, send an email to the head of department, or you can send an email to me and I will send an email to the head of department with details of what has been put in the project proposal, and just check there's no dual accreditation. Then I think the next most common issue that we have is that the students are proposing too broad a research area. This has got a couple of problems associated with it. So if they haven't refined it down through their initial research, if they try and do too broad a question or too broad a research area, there's a tendency to describe this sort of vast area rather than analyse it in depth. If they have a smaller research area, and within the 5,000 words they can analyse it in more depth, that will get them more marks. Or if they try to cover too much, they only have the word count to describe it, they're not going to get as many marks. So do keep a little lookout for that. The next one would be that they've got a title that encourages them to describe rather than analyse. Simple things they can do to try and avoid describing is to build some sort of comparison into their title. As soon as they start to compare, they'll naturally start to analyse more rather than describe. So keep a little lookout for that. And we can always talk about individual situations in more detail. Then the next one I would say is that they don't give us specific examples of the sources they've already found. So we get this: I'm planning to use books, journals and websites, and that's just not okay. That can't be approved because they haven't done the initial research. Next, if we've got a situation where somebody sort of very briefly mentions that they might start interviewing people or getting them to complete questionnaires, but there's no details about any ethical considerations, then that would be an issue. And then finally, safeguarding. Two ways this could be an issue. If they're planning to research a topic that means that they would be accessing harmful sources, the most frequent ones that come up is they want to look at childhood trauma or the experiences of serial killers and other things like that. So the sources that they're going to be accessing when they're researching that could easily be potentially harmful to them. So we have a safeguarding issue. So it's a no. But we can discuss that in individual situations. If you have a concern, please do raise it as soon as possible. And then if they're planning to do practical work, maybe for building an artefact, which is fantastic, and we're very, very supportive of, if there's no mention that they're going to conduct a risk assessment, or they know that they need to conduct a risk assessment, then we need to flag that up as well, just to make sure the research is safe. So that's our overview of completing the project proposal for the supervisor part B. If you have any questions, as always, please do email and let me know. And if not, I will be in touch shortly with the next stage.